Well, hopefully you hear me well. To start, my humblest apologies for not having made it. I was on my way to the ferry when my flights were cancelled. You may know I'm in New Zealand and we had the worst cyclone in living history. Uh, to have a tropical cyclone 37 south is unheard of. So sometimes I feel like we are discussing a lot of issues that are of importance, like IUU fishing, and yet we have this massive issue looming behind us that is climate change. So yeah, I'm very, very sorry I could not make it there. When I was reading the program, I was getting really excited because I have known or have interacted with many of you in the flow there for a long time, and I was really, really looking forward to have a catch up. But anyway, so also with the title of my presentation, undoubtedly I come from industry, and so perhaps I could provide a view from industry, but from industry working with government. For the last 20 years, I've been mostly working supporting governments, and this comes from a conversation I had years ago. When I was working for industry, I challenged one of the regulators to say, how you guys pretend to regulate what you don't understand? And he challenged me back, and he says, well, what are you going to do about it? And as an ex-fisherman, I like a challenge, and here I am working with governments and international organizations since then, doing exactly that, helping them to understand the industry they're trying to regulate. Yet before I start, I want to make something very clear. I'm going to be talking about the Pacific, but I've been a guest worker in the Pacific for over half my life. In no way, shape, or form I dare to speak for the Pacific. I've been honored a few times to speak with the Pacific in some aspect, but that's it. I'm a guest in the region, not a host. No one needs someone else from afar to speak on their behalf. As a mixed race person and as a former combatant, I have my own beef with colonialism, so I don't want to be even thought about, speaking on behalf of the Pacific. I've been working on this being home for over half my life, and I'm very thankful to many of my colleagues that allow me to work with them, but they don't work for me. About me, ridiculous mixture of nationalities. Been involved in fishing since I'm 17. Pretty much done every job that is to be done. I came to the Pacific in 1991, and since 1995 I'm based in New Zealand, and since 1998 as an advisor in terms of compliance and many, many levels for many people. And when I'm not doing my work, I write a fisheries blog. I love cooking for my family. I play music, and when I'm not on the ocean doing work, I'm in the ocean having fun. But I'm basically an overqualified fisherman. I've been hearing a lot constantly of pretty much, are you fishing as something that happens away from us, which is point fingers to them. And our position here in the Pacific, and I'm going to talk about the Pacific, particularly the Western and Central Pacific, which is to the left of your screen, is that this is our problem. We will deal with it. So most of my talk is in function of what we see and what we do as government, but also as industry organizations in this part of the world. And perhaps talked a bit about there's not many good stories in fisheries, but one of the better ones. So this is a big piece of the world, the Western and Central Pacific Fisheries Commission. And you have there all the ESETs of all the members and the ESETs of some of the foreign distant water fishing nations. But fundamentally, this is now a couple of years old. If there was no fisheries, the economic survival of many of the Pacific nations will be even more seriously compromised. Yeah, I spent a lot of time working in the Marshall Islands, where I act as a offshore fisheries advisor to the government, paid by the New Zealand Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And as an example, the government revenue that raised from issues around fisheries is 45%. If we were talking about Kiribati, it will be 68 to 70. Our most extreme case is Tokelau, where it's 81%. Yeah, so 81% of any money that comes into the country come out of fisheries licensing agreement. And how much tuna we catch? It's a lot. As you may see there, the Western and Central Pacific Ocean catches more tuna than the Indian, the Eastern Pacific, and Atlantic combined. Yep. So we are a substantial player in the region, in the world of tuna. How we manage this? Well, we talked about the Western and Central Pacific Fisheries Commission a bit before, which is our regional fisheries management organization that includes all the Pacific Island countries plus the coastal states. So then underneath the Western and Central Pacific Fisheries Commission, we have two big bodies that are the Pacific Island Fisheries Forum Agency, who was mentioned before, and I will come back to them because it's one of my biggest employers, and I have been working with them for almost 2 decades. And the Pacific Community, which former name was the Secretariat of the Pacific Community, that are the two regional organizations that provide support to the member countries in the Pacific, but also in the case of SPC, is the science provider to the Commission. Then we have a subgroup of the Pacific Islands Fisheries Forum Agency, which is the parties of the Nauru Agreement, also known as PNA, which is the countries that where most of the skipjack tuna caught by per seine is being caught. And they have a role in terms of maximizing revenue to the member countries and managing the fishery because it's the survival guide. And then it's the national government. So this is a very complex structure, but it's one that has been running for a long time. While the Commission is relatively new, a body like FFA is already 42 years old. So you may see, this I'm sure is going to be provided to you, but you may see the membership of the nations on the right of that graphs. The Western and Central Pacific Fisheries Commission manage everything by consensus. SPC is the science provider and data management provider to the Commission, to FFA and to PNA. FFA deals with fisheries policy, issues of management, and more important, compliance to its members, and we will look after that. And then it's PNA, as we thought, and then the national governments that bring their own needs. And this is not easy to understand if you're not from the region, and as you see in the graph, in the image next to you on the other side of the screen, there's a lot of lines. But, you know, we've been working for this for a long time, and it's by no means perfect, but it does the job. So is all this working? Yes, it is working, and that is the good news. And sometimes I get discouraged because it seems that in fisheries doom sells, but it really doesn't help. So when there are some things that are working, it's good to make them known because there is lessons to be learned there. This is the Majuro plot, which is the status of the 4 main stocks that we deal with: the skipjack tuna, South Pacific albacore, yellowfin tuna, and big eye. And they are in the green, means that it's not overfished and overfishing is not occurring. And this is not casualty. This is the effort of all the players, particularly the Pacific Island countries that I was discussing before. What you see here is 40 years of silent work. The Pacific Islands work as one. Everyone has his own reason, everyone has his own interest, but they have known many, many years ago that sharing costs doesn't mean sharing benefits. And they basically, if you're going to be licensed at any state to fish in anywhere in the Pacific Islands EZ, the licensing conditions are the same for all of the Pacific Island countries. So this was the first big win, which I'm going to discuss a bit later, which is the harmonized terms and conditions for licensing, which now we have extended to labor issues, but I get there. So again, a small idea of what are we talking. What you see there, the big green tower, that is the catch in thousands of tons. So the latest estimates were around 2,700 to 2,700,000 tons, and they're all in the green. While in the other RFMOs, you have either unknown uncertainties or totally overfished, as in the case of yellowfin and IODC. Doesn't mean that everything is perfect, of course not. There's more lot to work. As you see, the conditions of some of the bycatch in terms of the billfish is pretty rough. On the left, you see issues around seabird captures, particularly in the longline fleet, particularly in the high seas that require a lot of work. As I would say, I tend to be a positive man, and what is now is not good at all is getting better of what it was. So if we're at the trend line in the graph, we're getting there. We're getting better. Doesn't mean that it has to be good. Eric talked about the day about just before about the people, tangata, which is something that I always like to repeat and to keep in mind. And we talked a lot about fishing being a benefit to communities, not just cause of distress. And we are in the process of getting more vessels flagged to Pacific Island countries, which brings its own challenges, of course. But yeah, the value that is being catch taken in FFA waters is going up by FFA vessels, FFA member vessels. We do have a massive increase in terms of license and fees revenues. It's been a growth, and this has been massively through the work of the P&A group and the Vessel Day Scheme, which will be its own way to talk one day, its own 2 days conversation if you want to. But basically, and this is data that I have not updated because it's not been provided yet, but we are at this stage around 800 million US dollars from income for the countries out of 115 back in 2010. This is positive for the Pacific Island countries, and it's actually you can see it. You can go and see hospitals being made, schools being made, roads being worked, which we wouldn't see many years ago when I came to the Pacific. It also provides work, provides employment. For example, for countries like Tuvalu, the Observer program, and it's perhaps the biggest employer outside the government itself. More and more crew is going there with its caveats, as you discuss, and we perhaps may discuss a bit later on crewing issues. But yeah, it is more and more people are getting employed. Now, that's the good news. Now, in terms of going back to how we work with the IUU side, one of the issues that I struggle when I make presentation is that it seems that everyone thinks that IUU is it's just one thing all through the world and it's the same everywhere. And back in the long past, back in the last century, I used to be involved in music and playing in bands, and I always liked the idea of the mixing console. And actually, IUU is very different things in different levels of the same thing in different places. For example, you may have heard already from discussions before, what is the situation in the Atlantic East Coast, what is the situation in the South Atlantic one, and I knew well, because it's the only area that is outside the management of an RFMO at the moment. What is the situation in the Eastern Pacific, and what is the situation for us in the Western Pacific? Luckily for us, our problem is unreported, and I'm going to discuss a bit later on how I can say with assurance that it's unreported. Now, how we manage to not have, for example, or to have very little illegal fishing? Well, here's where the role of an organization like FFA comes in, which is a very interesting organization because it's all coastal countries. Yeah, when the law of the sea gave coastal countries the management of the EEZ, the Pacific Island leaders saw that if they tried to deal with this alone, they would be, breaking apart by those who wanted to fish in the waters. So that working as a group and sharing all the resources in terms of compliance, for example, in terms of monitoring, in terms of the MCS tools, monitoring, compliance, and surveillance tools that we have, monitoring, control, and surveillance tools we have, was the way to go. This is a picture of the Regional Surveillance Center in Honiara, in the Solomon Islands, and we're going to get into details later soon. What you see there is the regional VMS, where we manage the FFA VMS, the Commission VMS, also including IIS, and this is our electronic operation rooms, and what you see there is the regional surveillance picture. The regional surveillance picture gives you that image you see there, with all these different dots and colors and the EEZs and where every vessel that is in the commission is at any time. And then we have registers at FFA and registers at PNA. So you don't have to be there. I could be on my laptop right now, because I can't because I'm doing this talk, but I could be seeing the same at any time. And anywhere in the Pacific, in the fisheries administrations could be seeing this. We have codes. For example, we have what we call the Vessel Compliance Index that has been going for 20 years. So we have a risk associated to the history of compliance of that index. And we are moving also to having something similar, but with people, because the vessels don't do IUU. It's actually the skippers. And the skippers, the names can change vessels, but skippers have a bit more of a problem to change names. So we are, with caveats, because there is just privacy that we need to deal among 17 countries. We are running now a persons of interest program that is a bit of a vessel compliance index for people. For the vessels, we have low risk vessels that we constantly see on the VMS. Vessels that are not on the VMS, but we see it on IIS, or we call them medium risk, if there is, for example, carriers that come from another RFMO, or vessels that we have identified. And then we have high risk vessels, where it can be either a vessel that has been that we know and we have details of it, and it has committed infraction anywhere in the region, or vessels that have run out of license, or vessels that we have identification or don't know, or we may see it as an hexagon if it is or as a triangle if it is an IIS contact. Again, this is a very, very long discussions that I'm just splashing here. But to see, this is something that 17 countries can see at any time. Which are the countries that own the fish? This is an important thing. When I started fishing, the power was with the guys that have the boats. The Pacific is showing the world that the power is with the guys that have the fish. Well, but how you know if there is no illegal vessels that are not in the registers and not in the IIS and are not in the VMS and not, well, we do 2 weeks to 4 weeks long surveillance operations divided in the whole area of the Pacific. Many of them get surveilled 2 or 3 times in the year, and we do that with our own assets. Every Pacific Island country has a vessel, plus the help of the surveillance assets and patrol assets from New Zealand, Australia, France, and the US. And this is all coordinated from the Interagency Cooperation Center up in Honiara. So you transect, the plane goes around and look at all the vessels they see, identify the vessels, check if they are in any of the register, checks if we see it on BMS, check if it's an IIS, and if it's not, closest patrol vessel goes and boards them. So this is really effective, and in the last 7 years, we have found no vessels fishing that do not are either licensed or are in the registers. We found 2 years ago one that has the license not on board, but the license was coming. It's a matter of paperwork, not of non-compliance. And we're talking about 3,200 vessels fishing at any time, in between longliners and pesenas. Now, the key elements that I was working on that is what we call the harmonized minimum terms and conditions for all vessels intending to fish in regional waters. It's uniform and consistent application, and ensures that the Pacific Island countries are not playing against each other by the distant water fishing nations. And interestingly, and this was mentioned by Eric before, since 2020, 1st January 2020, this includes minimal labor standards. And the issue of labor standard for me is a personal one. I'm actually working with another of my hats as independent advisor on those issues, because again, seems to be that a lot of people that has genuine interest on this, they never been fishermen, or they don't really understand how it works to the inside. So I'm trying to help from my limited perspective. This is unique because before this, I could go on board, see somebody being, tied up on board or being beaten up or crucified or whatever you want to say, and that will not affect the capacity of that vessel to go back fishing. I could call the police could be involved and stop the vessel as a crime scene, but the license will not be removed. Now, minimal labor standards, which are a copy and paste of C188, are there, and if they're not being complied, we have the capacity to remove the access to fishing. We cannot push countries to sign or be a party of C188, but we can put the minimal elements there into our licensing standards, which also brings a lot of work to us because we need to build the capacities. And for example, Tuvalu is a country that has 11,000 people. That is less than a village in most of your countries. And for example, since they did this and they include this, they saw a migration of many of the longliners that were paying the license to fish in the waters to go and fish on the high seas, because then that wouldn't apply. They're not fishing the EZ. So in parallel, as FFA, we're working on a block to have a labor standards conservation and management measure as at the commission level, at the Western Central Pacific Fisheries Commission level, that will reflect similar standards to the one we request vessels when they come to fish into our waters, but for the high seas. Now, this has been a two-year process so far, and we hope that this year may go through. The next thing that is very important which is a great advantage, is solid registers. So to be fishing, you have to be, in the case of the 17 Pacific Island countries, you have to be in the good standing list of FFA, which are those who are in compliance with the harmonized terms and conditions. And for the rest, you have to be at least in the commission one, which doesn't have much of an element of compliance on it, but at least we can know. Then we have one of the biggest observer programs in the world. We had it, until it's going back now. We had it prior to COVID, with over 2,000 deployments, 100% of the pesenas, and unfortunately 5% of the longliners, for various reasons that we'll take another day to discuss. Well, but the job of the observer is to mostly look after scientific data, catch effort data, observation of fishing characteristic, and monitor regulatory conditions. But also they have a component of surveillance data where they have to provide vessel and aircraft sighting that they see. That helps. All this information comes through the IUU treaty, which is an agreement of cooperation in between all the member countries in terms of monitoring, control, and surveillance, which means that we have a harmonized system of information exchange in between all members. So whatever is seen in one country can be accessed by others. It's not perfect, but again, it's getting there, and it's getting better. I don't have a problem with perfect, because anything that is not perfect can be perfectible. But one of my mantras is don't let the perfect get on the way of the good. Two people talking is better than no people talking. So we are getting there with this. And of course, it takes time and it takes a lot of money, which I'm going to discuss later. We have been involved already for maybe 12 years now in terms of electronic reporting is pretty much standard for us now, not only at the vessel level, but also at the observer level, meaning that the information gets relied by satellite straight to the databases on daily basis. With electronic monitoring and the cameras, and that is taking a bit longer, and there's a lot of problems associated to the cost of information yet, and standardization among everything. So we have the strategy at FFA level, and now we are trying to getting it through the commission level, which that potentially will be a game changer. Now, is this working? Yes, which is great to say. Back in 2016, FFA decided to challenge this, to basically is what we're doing working? So they commissioned a big study, which I was very lucky to be part of, on the quantification of IUU. Not just saying, oh, is this happening? No. How much it is and how much is it costing us? So we did that in 2016, and then we updated it again on 2020. So it was done in 2015, published in 2016, updated it 5 years later. The importance of this is not only the data that we got on the volumes, but also it allows you to target your resources in the areas that are needed most. We saw and we find out that the issue of illegal wasn't as important as we thought, but the issue of misreporting was bigger than we thought. So the 2020 update show us that we had almost a 50% reduction based on better focus of our MCL tools and better data acquisition strategies that we gained by doing the first report in 2016. By the way, all this is downloadable and accessible to anyone to read. So from 306,000 tons that we had an estimate, we dropped it to 192. The full cost went from 616 million to 313 million. And the importance of this is not the full cost, but the economic loss to FFA members went from 152 million to 43 million. Now, this may not see a lot if you think that the tuna industry is worth $8 billion, but the budget of some of the countries I work, the annual government budget is around 60 million. So imagine how much importance this is, particularly when I show you in one of the earlier slides, how big the contribution of fisheries licenses is. So the assumption that unlicensed fishing is rampant in the WCO is false. The study reaffirms that misreporting contributed to estimated 89% of the volume of IUU tuna fishing. The other thing that I found that, this is nothing new for those who work on the topic, is that IUU is not straightforward. While the formal definition of IUU fishing is relatively clear in theory, applying the purpose of quantifying its nature and extent presents a range of practical challenges. And that is where I always find the biggest gap. The practicality of doing things, particularly when you live and work in countries with very limited resources. The estimates of illegal transshipping have come down, but monitoring and control remains work in progress. But the main thing of the 2021 report is that to prove that cooperation works. And if it's something if it's only one thing that you will take away from all these words that I'm telling you from New Zealand, is cooperation works, particularly among coastal states. This again is available. So we have we separated the study in between Pasanen, tropical longline, and southern longline, and all the categories on the left, and little arrows that tell you if it goes down, if it stays stable, or if it's gone up. Again, this will be accessible to all of you. Of course, so now we have this. So what is in the horizon for us? We are working on, because obviously we find out that transshipment is a big thing in terms, and this is legal transshipping in port. All containers can only transship in port. We have an issue with long lines transshipping at sea, but the biggest volume is containers transshipping in port. So you may see with the white arrow, we're installing scales now, which is remote reading scales, and we did a study of what are the best scales. So when we do the transshipments, we see literally what is the weight being transferred from the fishing vessel to the carrier. We have as a region a port state measures framework where we're working all together on the standardization of systems. If a country wants or not to sign port state measures agreement, it's their decision. Yet, as part of the FFA system, you could just jump and sign, but we're not going to sign on behalf of members. It's their decision. But the system is totally compatible. It's based on a port state measures agreement, and it's an area of personally strong interest. And then we are working on a catch documentation scheme to pass that through the Commission, which is the one that they should be involved, because catch documentation schemes that are not fishery wide tend not to be very effective. And then, interestingly, we're working on incentive for compliance. Obviously, the system as it is now has not worked since I fish, or worked partially. There's way less people in government than fishermen or fishing boats, and so what is so? If I catch you, you bad boy. That doesn't work. So what are the incentives? Is there a capacity to work on incentive compliance? For example, provide cheap access to the fishery, because we have to spend less time looking at you, working on compliance story, making it more expensive or complicated for those with the worst compliance story. Why the licensing has to be the same for those who play by the rules and those who don't? That is where I'm pleasantly working and putting my small brain into it to find alternatives. We already work out on a system where instead of we as an authority trying to prove the industry or the vessels wrong, they have to prove themselves right to us. And that is changing the situation. So yeah, we are working on this, and again, not going to go into the details, but this is more or less the big pictures. I'm not very good at speaking a lot of languages and all bad, so I like pictures and I like to see things graphically. That helps me a lot. Of course, that comes with a hell of a lot of challenges. Yeah, and we have many. The IT side is still a long way to go. We are getting better, but this costs a lot of money, and also requires a level. So we're talking about some of the less developed countries in the world, in our region. So our priorities need to compete with others, and IT is fundamental. But we don't. Some of our members do not even have a cable yet. Yeah, it's not fiber optics there. So it is a challenge at many levels, not only cost but also local capacities as well. The issues around the integration of electronic monitoring and electronic reporting into everyday operations. There is issues that are legal in terms of electronic evidence, data processing capabilities, and the availability of dry observers, people that will actually go through the footage, issues around artificial intelligence work, but you need to be very specific in the type of, the operations of a long line are not at all compatible with the operations of a container, for example. Issues around software and cost, enforcement capacity, and what happens with the high seas-based longliners. They don't even go to port for years. So yeah, plenty of issues there. High seas transshipments, it's a mess. We are working very strongly on this as a Pacific Island countries. And the countries that are doing high seas transshipments are pretty stable all through the world. And we understand that it may be impracticable for certain vessels to operate. But instead of being an exemption, it's becoming the norm. We went from 552 events reported, these are the reported in 2014, to 1,809 in 2020. And if you see, it's impracticable to come to port to transship, yet it seems not to be really impracticable to transship right at the EEZ's borders or right into the high seas pockets. So somebody's not playing fair here. And again, it comes to the other component where everyone goes, oh, port state measures, coastal state measures. What about flag state responsibility? If you read that little book by FIO, honestly, if you were to comply with only 50% of what it says there, we will not have many of the problems we have. So, but a massive issue has changed the way we fish. And I know this because I started fishing and we were basically finding fish in a way that's totally different 25 years later. Now it's drawing by numbers. There's so many FADs in some areas that I always joke that it's not free school anymore. It's just schools of fish swimming between FADs. Again, a long discussion that we could go further, but we don't have time. But also it's combined because we have now not only the issue of FADs being used by and deployed by fishing boats, but also carriers that involve in high sea transshipments and in port transshipment being involved in picking up or deploying parts, and sometimes the abuse of the understanding of the way you deploy a FAD and you pick up a FAD by port inspectors who actually never worked on a fishing boat. So they can tell them whatever they want, and the police and the fisheries inspectors do not know better. But that's a different conversation that we can have. We talked about at length to this morning in terms of labor standards, and so I'm not going to go into details. I have written about this quite a lot, but I go into details that we don't deal with much. You see this young guy in the picture. He earns $350 on a month on a 3-year contract, no going home. If he was Spanish, or if he was on a Spanish fishing vessel, he would be making around $1,000 US in a month, with 4 months on and 2 off, 2 to 4 off the trip. So he will go home, all expenses paid by the employer, and when he is at home, he will have a base salary, not that kind of money, but a base salary. If he was Ecuadorian, he will be around $500 US a month with 70 days off a year paid. So what happens with the same job for same remuneration for same salary? Well, at FFA, with our minimum harmonized terms and conditions, we can guarantee a contract. We cannot guarantee the amount of his salary. So it's not only labor, it's also exploitation. And I'm very pleased to see that, for example, more and more some countries are starting to, at least for the vessels, the people on their vessels, to have a minimal salary. Taiwan is doing this. And for example, if you want to fish in Tuvalu waters, you have to pay at least $450 US. So the issue of exploitation is a bigger issue, but it's one that we should also keep aware. Now, finally, I'm getting to the end. The big thing is also the under-resourcing of fisheries administrations. And I'm not making it up. This was me in 2017, and this was my fisheries vehicle, and this was the corporate identity of the Ministry of Fisheries. So the excellent actions of a fisheries officer led to arrest of vessel with fines around $3 million, yet he earns $25,000 a year. The funding organizations and the talent retention is woefully low comparison to the value of the fishery. Yet we have competing needs, at country level, health, infrastructure, education, they're all to be attended as well. My point here is that to deal with the level of development of the present fisheries requires excellence, yet we only pay mediocrity or sadness to fisheries officers. So how we pretend to get more and better people to work with us? Then another challenge is geopolitics. Subsidies, well, we have good news. Now let's see if they get implemented. But the Pacific is a playground for diplomatic influence. And I'm not going to go into the details of this, but distant water fishing nations are not playing their part as responsible flag states in some cases. For non-Pacific islands and distant water fishing nations, the issue of sustainability is one of long-term financial benefit. However, for the Pacific islands, it's also one of identity and food security, one that the distant water fishing has less problems with. They can leave, but Pacific island countries can't. Finally, this is, tuna is the lifeline of the Pacific, but the balance of benefit is status quo in a way that has not moved far from the times of colonialism. I'm 59 and I'm older than most of the countries I work with. Yeah, I'm not 159, just 59. Colonialism is still around here. At 55, I'm older. This is now a bit older, but I'm older than most of the countries I work with. Now, why this is the issue of climate change? Why is this important? I'm trying to move forward, so otherwise I'm going to be delaying. You see, with climate change, tuna is moving east. As long as tuna is in the blue areas where we can put the rules, we can control what happens. But as tuna moves east due to climate change, it's moving into the areas where we don't put the rules, where flag states supposedly put the rules. So not only we didn't cause climate change, but also we seem to be the most affected by it. My colleagues in Marshall Islands, when there is storms from the southwest, they need to wait for the tide to go down before they can cross the causeway. That's just a small example. You see there how climate change is moving the benefits from abundance of tuna towards the east, where it's just high seas. So finally, if those all were not challenges, in my personal opinion, our biggest challenge is attracting diversity and new ways of thinking. I think I've been one of the youngest advisors in fisheries in the region, and the only one with a fishing background for over 20 years now. And that reflects very poorly on us as a sector. And I mean as a worldwide sector. If you were to design a stereotype of a fisherman, you wouldn't go far from a big bearded man with sun and dry skin that is weary to paper pushes. That would be me. If my gender, age, and background represents the only way to do things, how come we are facing the problems we have? How hypocritical it will be for me not to try to bring and listen to new voices, new perspectives, and new ways to do things. Yeah? We need capable people keen to help and work things out, not just point fingers. Many of my colleagues in the Pacific goes, man, it's so disheartening. I'm trying to do the best with little I can, and all the developing countries, all the developed countries, all the people in the countries with money, point fingers to us and says, you guys suck, you're useless. And I go, well, come and help, yeah? But it seems that working in fishing is akin to being a criminal or a victim of labor abuses with nothing in the middle. And I'm living proof that that's not the case, yeah? There is extremes, as in any form of distribution on a bell curve. There's extremes at both ends, but in the middle is people, trying to do the job. And I haven't cashed in. I don't have all the fish I caught through my life in the back of my house. It's been eaten by someone. So for me, this is the biggest challenge. We want better fisheries. We want more things. We want, but we are not helping to bring the people that we need to this. Yeah. Thank you. And as I say, if you have questions, I'm not young enough to know everything, as Oscar Wilde said. But I wanted to put one more before I go, and it's a phrase that guides me since many years, is we have two choices: to abandon hope and ensure that the worst will happen, or to make use of the opportunities that exist and contribute to a better world. For me, it's not a hard choice, and I'm trying to do that. And whatever you do, don't get discouraged, keep pushing, because if you don't do it, nobody else will do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blaha. Your presentation is always interesting and insightful. I will take some questions. Do you have any question? Professor Rafael Bamror. Ah,
Okay, thank you very much for your great presentation and quite a lot of hope. I mean, the capacity to work together can make a lot of things, and it's impressive to see also the licensing, what you have been able to do with the licensing, and it's very impressive. I have a question on this respect. Licensing seems to bring quite a lot of revenues to this islands. But there's still another source of revenue that was not touched upon, was the big share of profits relates to the ownership of the capital of the ships. In this respect, is there any strategy in the region to develop ownership, to also develop crewing and develop also flag state control? I mean, basically having something which is even enhancing its regional capacity to control also the revenue from the capital itself. Do you have any strategy for that or not?
Yes, and it's been worked for a while. It's a much harder. Sorry, before that, it's culturally for me to refer to people with a name. So could you give me your name, please, so I know who I'm talking to?
So, sorry, Rafael Baumler, War Maritime University.
Oh, thank you, Rafael. Look, yes, you touch on a very complex point, as smart men tend to do. You see, as I say, these are countries that are fairly new and have to develop most of their capacities in many, many areas. So imagine running a country with 11,000 people, yeah, or 60,000, as in the case of Marshall Islands. So there is not only in terms of strengthening capacities, but also of institutional maturity, if you want to call it. And some of the capitals that you need to run fishing operations like per se are massive. They may exceed the capacity of the country and half the budget, for example. So yes, there is a strategy that is being dealt by the leaders at the FFA, at the Pacific Islands Fisheries Forum Agency, that is looking into progressive domestication of the industry, which is not just flag to us, and that's it. I have worked with in countries where basically, yes, we have a vessel that has the flag of that country, but there is not even an office of that flag. Yeah, there's not even one person of that nationality in the vessel. Yeah, this is nothing new. Yeah, and you don't have to look at developed countries to point fingers. I inspected U.S. vessels where the only U.S. citizen is the paper captain, yeah, which is normally an alcoholic that comes up in the mornings to look for food, and that's it. I inspected Panamanian vessels, and there is no one there that is from Panama. Nobody even speaks Spanish. So this is not new. We have a policy. Some countries have a minimal. If you license to the country, you need to have at least four crews of the licensing country, of the flagging country, not the licensing country. Licensing works in different things for the flagging state. So there is a strategy. It is working. It is not as fast as we all want it. But as I say before, don't let the perfect get on the way of the good. It is the long-term perspective to go there. You see, the issue of, for example, I grew up in a farm, and we knew that the guy who makes the money out of the farm is not. You don't make the money out of the farm by selling your cows to the guy who has the truck. You actually subcontract the guy who has the truck to take the cows to the abattoir, and then at some stage you start subcontracting the transport to the abattoir, and you start subcontracting the abattoir to process your cows. That's where you start making the money. So that philosophy exists. However, it's quite hard to ask immediate results from countries that literally are struggling out of independence and colonialism, plus the rest, plus climate change, plus all other issues. So yes, that is there. And finally, in terms of my last slide, it's really hard to get people to work in fisheries, particularly when they have this, excuse my French, the shit salaries that we offer. Yeah. So yeah, it is there, but it's not there yet. But it's on site, and hopefully we get there. That help?
Yes. And next question, Mr. Brent.
Yeah, thanks. Francisco, I'm Brant Wagner from the ILO in
I know
Geneva.
you.
Yeah, you know me. I think we met, and some of my colleagues have been working in the labor standards group that you guys have set up, which is really impressive, and based on Convention 188. So thank you for that. But you mentioned in your presentation that you had this issue with fishing licenses. You were linking the labor standards, to the fishing licenses, and then some vessels were then moving out to work on the high seas, and so you were moving out now to look at how you could do this through the WCPSC, in the region to cover the vessels that were outside of the exclusive economic zone. How are you dealing with that from an enforcement perspective? How are you going to enforce that? Thanks.
Now, if it is a CMM, if it is a region-wide conservation and management measure, then the process is that the flag state incorporates that in their own legislation. Yep. Once it's incorporated in their own legislation, they should have their own procedures to do that. Now, during surveillance operations at regional level, like the ones I talked before, where you go into high seas and you have the right to board a vessel, because that is one of the conditions to be part of the RFMO, that is an area where we could go and see by having labor, which is a really complex situation, as you know, labor knowledge on fisheries operations. So are you going to bring labor inspectors on a patrol boat, like the way you bring now fisheries inspectors in a patrol boat? Are you going to train fisheries inspectors on labor issues? They're quite substantially different issues. I recently did a training with a colleague from South Africa, which is actually the training that you guys do through the capacitation unit in Turin on setting up inspection programs under C188. And the South Africa example where they both are working as one, it's very encouraging. Yet we have issues of capacity and development. So look, I wish I could tell you it's happening. It's not happening yet, but we're talking about it and we're trying to do things. As I say, we're making use of the best opportunities. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. So yeah, a lot of capacity and a lot of effort needs to be built. And I struggle a bit as well with the issue of now, which is not a topic that we talk here, but the issue of private certifications moving to this, because they are creating a parallel system. There is a role for the state to do this. It's inherent to the job of the state. So if you want to help, don't create a parallel system. Support the bodies in the governments that need to deal with this. Otherwise, just let's privatize everything and just move on, which is not the case, because in 25 years' time, so I've been fishing now for almost 40 years. We have bodies now that weren't there when I started fishing, and we like it or not, in 30 years' time there will be some form of government or not, but there will not be a private label, or maybe not, or there will not be some big fishing company or big retailer to do this. So yeah, that worries me a bit, and I haven't touched on this because it wasn't the topic, but thank you for reminding me of this. We need to work with the bodies that deal with this, and we need to work, as I said before, we can prove that cooperation on fighting IUU works. So that's the next step.
Okay.
Helps?
That was thank you very much, and that's really helpful because we're trying to figure this out as well from our end. Thanks.
And next question is Ms. Mimin Lei of FAO.
Hi,
Hello,
Francisco. Nice to see you here. I still remember last August we had this discussion in Greece where you mentioned the Pacific Islands, their decision, because basically you have a very robust regional posted measures framework, and in some aspects it's more stringent than the requirements in PSMA. And then the Pacific states, they believe, since they are already implementing the post measures, they don't see much necessity to join the PSMA. And also you mentioned it today in your presentation. But for us, we try to see it from a different perspective, because because I think Brent also mentioned regarding the Convention 188, some states also they're saying we have like more stringent measures in our national legislation, so they don't see the necessity. But from our like perspective, we see it like joining the PSMA or joining Convention 188, we bring or encourage more countries to be on board, and I think yesterday our Ifesina, she also mentioned one of the key important aspects that she see to try to address IUU fishing in African continent is cooperation. So like bringing like Pacific Islands in the group of PSMA and also introducing your excellent cooperation mechanism in place with regard to minimum requirements in the terms of conditions in your access agreement and regional vessel list and also regional MCS, even your risk analysis tool. This could be of great value to other countries in the other part of the world. So, and also thank you for bringing the flag state responsibilities and the small FAO book. Because basically we refer to the compliance agreement, right? The legally binding instruments which set out the minimum requirements as a flag state of fishing vessels, and as you said, if the countries are actually implementing the requirements in compliance agreement, probably we don't need the post measures agreement because primarily it's flag state who resumes the primary responsibilities to control its vessels. So thank you for bringing that. And actually last year, FAO conducted a study to understand how compliance agreement is implemented. And surprisingly, even though compliance agreement has only 45 parties, but our study showed actually nearly 90 states they are actually implementing those requirements contained in compliance agreement, being a contracting party or member of different RFMOs. So see, those countries, so they're actually implementing the requirements in compliance agreement at the regional level in the context of RFMO. So our view on this would be, it wouldn't be that hard for bring them on board to join the compliance agreement, because eventually, only with more countries join these international instruments will we bring this like information exchange that is already required in the international agreements and bring transparency to the fishery sector and also bring cooperation between flag states, port states and coastal states. And that is how we see the addressing the problem of IUU fishing could be solved. So my quick question is actually regarding, because I understand that you are also involved in this study about towards the quantification of IUU fishing in the Pacific region, right? And I don't know. I think it might be a very complex issue, but I would be very interested in knowing the methodology that you applied in quantify your IUU fishing. And what kind of information will be required for you to undertake this study? I know it may be very complex and difficult to address in a few minutes, but just some inspiration from your side. Thank you.
We analyze all the sources of information we have from the FFA, So we have our own information management systems that connect to the FFA, but also all the monitoring of volumes is structured by SPC, by the Secretariat of the Pacific Community, and in real time reporting. So we do that, plus all the information we get from all the surveillance organizations. Once we have all the data sources identified, then we worked on the structuring of the risks associated to each, the prevalence associated to each, and my job was to do a lot of the ground truthing, which is to see if what in assumptions is that do work on issues around the reality, for example, and then Monte Carlo projections on the statistical side. I'm more than happy to send you the report with all the statistical analysis and the methodology, because otherwise we may put to sleep half, or I would say 90% of the people listening to this, because it was quite complex and I still struggle to understand a lot of it. But basically, it's everything you could, analyzing what's nice from what's necessary, modeling scenarios, and then applying a statistical analysis to each of the scenarios to see what are the ranges of certainty. You mentioned a lot of the agreements, and this is now from experience in the region, and I will not say just the region, but also worldwide. A lot of those agreements tend to be signed by push of the foreign affairs section of the government, yet then need to be implemented by the fishery side of the government. That many of these agreements on the labor side of this, they come up with, how you want me to do this with the budget I have? So, and then one thing is to sign, the next thing is to do. A lot of people sign, and then they're not the capacities to do, and then they get inspected, and then they're getting point fingers to say you're not complying with what you sign, and then there is trade measures against them. So sometimes it's better, their view is better not to sign before actually doing something that you don't, you're not get caught on the inside. And for me, if you are doing port state measures, which is an area of very close to both of us, if you're doing port state measures, that is vital, and that makes signing then easier. Some people go, I sign, then I do. Other people go, I do, then I sign. But yeah, we are encouraging countries to, to have the systems able to sign at any time of their own decision. Anyway, it will be you're one of the persons I was really keen to see. So hopefully the next time.
Okay, the time is running out, so I think we need to conclude your lecture. So anyway, thank you so much for your input and your insightful presentation. So please give him another round of applause. Thank you, Mr. Blaha.
Yeah, sorry not to be there. I really wanted to go and try your wonderful food as well.
Yep.